one of the great insults that devotees sometimes hurl at others or at one another is that someone is a Mayavadi, someone is an impersonalist. A Mayavadi is a very great, it's in one sense it's the greatest insult we can give to another person is to call them a Mayavadi, an impersonalist. But this is a kind of mixed thing because some Mayavadis, some impersonalists can become personalists, just like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was a great impersonalist who became a devotee. So it's possible, not usual, but possible. There's a verse that is often quoted to say that impersonal realization is imperfect and it causes people to fall down. Prabhupada quotes that verse from the 10th canto a lot of Krishna. And he says that that verse says that it's a very lonely existence to believe that Brahman is the highest. And in Prabhupada's Pranam Mantra, the second one, it talks about how wonderful it is to preach against impersonalism and voidism. When Prabhupada first came to America, there was someone named Dr. Mishra. Maybe some of you have seen the video of Dr. Mishra's Ananda Ashram in New York. And he was a Shankarite. This Dr. Mishra, I don't think he's still alive, was the place where Prabhupada first started preaching. But first, according to one devotee, he just stood in the back of the room and didn't say much at all, and let this Dr. Mishra preach. And he was always talking about impersonal realization being the highest thing that you could achieve. One time I visited this Ananda Ashram in New York with Prabhupada, and Dr. Mishra wasn't there, but some of his followers were there. And Prabhupada was arguing with them. And because they were saying that I'm a bubble, make me to see. That's the impersonalist realization that you can merge and become one with God and that everyone is with God. This is the very first time I ever saw Prabhupada become sort of angry. And his message was that if I'm a bubble, make me to see. But his argument was that the gold in a ring is the same as the gold in a gold mine, but the ring cannot be the gold mine. And do you agree? And the people who were arguing with him were saying, we had to agree because it's very logical. And so there was a debate that ensued, and it was the first time that I had ever seen Prabhupada in this mood of debating someone. And this is an example of how important it is to be able to debate. It's also very important to be able to quote scripture and rely upon scripture as truth. But sometimes one has to debate. There was an instance where one of the devotees was in, I think it was Copenhagen, wherever Copernicus was from. Was he from Denmark? I don't know. He was the person who, in astronomy, established that the so-called established that the sun was the center of the planet, and the planets were going around the sun instead of all the planets, including the sun, going around the earth. Changed it from a heliocentric to from a geocentric to a heliocentric concept. And so this devotee was giving a talk. I think it was Sri Dharma Prabhu, and this man stood up in the audience, and I think it was in Denmark, and in one of those Scandinavian countries, and he said, "But how do we know that what you're saying is true? Maybe everything you're saying is false. Why are we to believe this?" And the answer was, "Here I am in the country of Copernicus, who changed the whole way of thinking of astronomy of the Western world, and you're so closed-minded that you think that I might be saying something wrong, and actually you should follow in the footsteps of Copernicus and be very open-minded." This was an example of what we call in the States thinking on your feet. And Prabhupada was very expert at this, very expert at debating. He could say, sometimes I would hear him say, just forget about Krishna, just forget about realization, and let's just argue. And he would be able to argue on a very sort of mundane level, it would seem, on a kind of thinking on your feet, debating platform. This was always very important. And I think Prabhupada said to some of us that when he was young, he was always the leader. He said that, and everyone kind of nodded their head and could understand that it was very important to be able to defeat people. sometimes if one relies just on scripture, people will think that a person who relies just on scripture is just parroting knowledge and not being able to think independently and not being able to have any thought process going on. So this is a very important thing. I think it was in the last meeting that Giriraj had with Prabhupada, and he asked Prabhupada, he said, so if we chant Hare Krishna 16 rounds, follow regulated principles, and go to Mangal Arati, then everything will go on all right, even though you're not here with us. And Prabhupada said, yes, that's correct. And then I asked Giriraj if this actually happened, and he confirmed that this was true. And he said that as he was on his way out, he heard Prabhupada say, and use your intelligence and organization. So there was the element of the importance of chanting, following the regulated principles, and attending the morning program, going to Mangal Arati, attending the morning program. And on top of that, using one's intelligence and organization. This is an example of being able to think clearly, not just repeatedly and relying solely and only on what we read in the books, but on being able to apply our intelligence and organization. So I think I'm reaching the end of my time here. I have a couple of minutes if anyone wants to say anything or ask anything. Yes, Bobby?
About 6 months ago in Vrindavan, a woman, she would have been maybe 55, 60 years old, she came to me and she was looking for, golly, I can't even remember what she was originally looking for, but we just started chatting. I was asking her, is she a devotee within ISKCON? And she said, no, well, I belong to another ashram. It's called the Ananda ashram. Is that what the mission is? Anyway, but whatever it's called. And then we started talking about Prabhupada's early days, and it actually ended up that she is a disciple of this Dr. Mishra, and that he is still alive. He said that, she said, oh, he's very old now.
Must be.
And then I was able to direct her to, that footage that is on the, so she went and she bought that footage on that DVD in Vrindavan. She had never seen it before. It was so many, like 40 years old. So, it's
Dr. Mishra, he must be in his 90s.
Dr. Mishra, yeah. Dr. Mishra.
This is a very interesting point because this argument took place between sort of impersonalism and Mayavadism and Vaishnavism. And there's always been this kind of like a conflict between the two philosophies of Mayavadism and Vaishnavism, on the other hand. At the same time, Prabhupada was always, and you can see on this video, very friendly with Dr. Mishra. In the video, they're eating together, they're sitting together, they're talking in jovial ways. So on the one sense, they had a very vehement disagreement philosophically. On another platform, they were very good friends personally. And I think they probably were right up until the time that Prabhupada left. They would have been good friends.
Yes, and the fact that this woman was now in Vrindavan, in the midst of Krishna consciousness, but she was still, considering herself as a disciple of Dr. Mishra, but she was there.
Mm. So it shows that even though it's the usual case that impersonal realization is imperfect, and very often people who are impersonalists fall back down into the material world, as is said in the Bhagavatam in the 10th canto, that impersonalists can rise to the platform of devotional service and Vaishnavism, and like this lady who came to Vrindavan, and she was a devotee of Dr. Mishra. This is an example of how important it is to keep friendship, even though we may philosophically disagree on things. And this is part of Trinada Pisanichina, that we offer respect to everyone, even though we may defeat them in debate or may disagree with their philosophy, but we keep friendship. And Prahlad Maharaj also emphasized how important it is that there's no such thing as friends and enemies. We may have serious enemies, enemies who actually want to kill us, like Putana wanted to kill Krishna. But he regarded her as his mother, so even though she was an enemy. So this is an example of how enemies are not actually enemies, they're actually friends. Anyway, I'm getting way over time. One more.
Right, you were saying that the materialistic people, they think the devotees are not acting in the real world, that they're no, not normal. So how can we help them understand that actually the devotees are acting on the platform of real truth and reality?
Mark, can I just, you need to repeat the questions because people are listening on the
Okay.
radio.
So the question was, how can we help people understand that the spiritual world is the real world? Is that?
Yeah,
And that the so-called normal real world is imaginary dream world. So I don't know if I can give a definitive answer to that, but obviously we can help them by giving them the philosophy in the form of books or in the form of prashadam, giving them association. We can help them that way. We may not be able to convince them in one sitting or standing why they're living in a dream. On the other hand, we can help them by giving them Krishna consciousness, just like by just being in a place like Rolomban, being seen, that's helping. That may be agyata sukriti, but it's helping. Sometimes people come to a temple and see the deities and they become convinced that that's God, and that I should be a devotee. That's unusual, but that happens sometimes. There was a devotee I know. He's a devotee of Satsang Maharaj in good standing still today, as far as I know. When he first saw the devotees chanting, he saw a chanting party on Oxford Street. His first response was he kicked the devotee who was chanting. And that person, we might consider an enemy. That person became a devotee, and a very good devotee as well. So it was a matter of time. It wasn't an instantaneous realization that these people were living in a kind of dream world. But over time, he realized that they were the real. They were actually living in the real world. Of course, you've had the experience that sometimes people come into a temple, they come into the association of devotees, and they instantly think that this is real. This is the real world. This is what I've been waiting for. This is what all my life has led up to this point, and they become a devotee. They become initiated. That is unusual, but it happens.